The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting an eerie pallor on the sterile white walls of the Pineville police station. It was a small, quiet town where not much ever happened, but tonight was different. I, Detective Sarah Mitchell, found myself trapped in a nightmare that I could never have imagined. It started like any other evening shift. The station was nearly empty, with just a few officers scattered throughout the building. I had settled into my dimly lit office, a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand, and a pile of paperwork to complete. As I sifted through the case files, I heard the soft, hesitant footsteps of Officer Jenkins approaching my door. "Detective Mitchell, we've got something strange going on in the holding cells," he said, his voice wavering slightly. I sighed, setting down my pen. "What's going on, Jenkins? We don't have time for pranks tonight." He looked genuinely rattled. "It's not a prank, Detective. You should come see for yourself." Reluctantly, I followed Jenkins down the dimly lit corridor towards the holding cells. The air grew colder with each step, and a growing sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. As we approached the cells, I heard a faint, eerie whispering. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The source of the sound became clear as we reached the last cell on the left. Inside the cell, a disheveled man huddled in the corner, his eyes wide with terror. He was muttering incomprehensible words in a language I couldn't place. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his tattered clothes were smeared with dirt and blood. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath. Jenkins seemed just as baffled as I was. "We found him wandering near the woods on the outskirts of town. Says his name is Elias, but he won't answer any questions. He just keeps chanting that gibberish." I approached the cell cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. "Elias, can you hear me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. The man continued his incoherent chanting, his eyes never leaving mine. I felt a shiver run down my spine as the words he spoke seemed to grow louder and more urgent. Suddenly, the lights overhead flickered, and the cell door slammed shut with a deafening clang. Jenkins and I jumped back in shock, and I fumbled for my keys to unlock the door. But before I could open it, the lights went out completely, plunging us into darkness. The only sound was the echoing chant of the man inside the cell. Panic gripped me as I struggled to find my flashlight, and when I finally turned it on, I couldn't believe what I saw. Elias was no longer alone in the cell. Figures, shadowy and indistinct, crowded around him, their twisted forms contorting in unnatural ways. Their eyes gleamed with an otherworldly malevolence, and their fingers reached out towards him, as if trying to drag him into their nightmarish world. I screamed, and Jenkins and I both fumbled for our guns, but the figures were gone as quickly as they had appeared. The lights flickered back on, and the cell door stood open once more. But Elias was gone. Panic set in as we searched the station for any sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The officers on duty were equally baffled and unnerved by what they had witnessed. Hours turned into a sleepless night as we reviewed the security footage, trying to make sense of the inexplicable events. Elias's sudden appearance and disappearance remained a chilling mystery. As dawn broke, I decided to visit Elias's last known location, the woods on the outskirts of town. Jenkins accompanied me, and neither of us spoke much during the drive. The events of the night had left us both shaken. The woods were dense and foreboding, their towering trees casting long, ominous shadows. We ventured deeper into the forest, following an unsettling feeling that seemed to pull us further into its heart. And then we found it, a clearing in the woods with a makeshift altar. Twisted symbols and strange, inscrutable markings covered the ground. It was a place of dark rituals, and I couldn't help but wonder if Elias had been a part of whatever sinister activity had taken place here. As I examined the altar, Jenkins let out a startled cry. He was standing near a tree, staring wide-eyed at a crude drawing carved into the bark. It depicted a grotesque figure, half human, half monster, with outstretched arms and a sinister grin. I turned to Jenkins, but he was no longer there. In his place stood the same nightmarish figure from the carving, a monstrous entity with elongated limbs and piercing yellow eyes. I stumbled back in terror, my heart racing. I was trapped in this nightmarish world, just as Elias had been. The entity advanced slowly, its eyes never leaving mine. I raised my gun, but it was useless. Bullets passed through the creature without effect. With a sudden, swift movement, the entity reached out and touched my forehead, and an overwhelming sense of dread and despair washed over me. I felt my very essence being ripped apart, and as darkness closed in, I realized that I was lost. The last thing I heard was the entity's whispered words, like a sinister lullaby, as it claimed me for its own. He revealed, "I am Elias, and I had died 3 years ago. It was you who had caught me for a crime I never committed." The constable kept on beating me the whole of that night until I confessed, and then finally lost my breath due to injuries. You didn't bother to investigate that case honestly. Today, I take my revenge. And then there was nothing but darkness. I am now a part of this malevolent force, trapped in a world of eternal horror and suffering. The Pineville Police Station is no longer a place of safety, but a haunt of the damned, where the living and the dead are forever entwined in a never-ending nightmare.